urban digital participation. Cities today are getting more and more smart, so digitization in cities is omnipresent. Open data is available and so on. So this is a pillar for building so-called smart cities. But it's not sufficient to have open data and to digitize cities. But what we need is also to include people in participatory processes. And this is what we want to talk about today. So to what extent can digitization of participatory processes can support inclusion of citizens into decision-making processes, policy development, budgeting, and also cooperation among citizens. So we will hear different perspectives on urban digital participation. We will discuss opportunities we have in using digital tools to enhance participation, but also talking about potential limitations and threats. We will start with Milena Vukovic. Milena Vukovic is at VRVis. She is a group leader and leading the participatory visual systems group. She has a background in climate science and climate modeling, but she's enhancing also her work with visualization and development of digital tools where citizens can add and interactively support climate action in cities. So I hand over to Milena and let's listen to her.
Thank you. Yeah, this works very good. So I prepared a short presentation as introduction to today's panel on the topic of digital participation in urban contexts, where I want to share some related experiences from the past and ongoing projects on different aspects of citizen participation. So as Katja also mentioned already, my name is Milena and I'm head of the research group Participatory Visual Systems at VRVis, which is composed of a very interdisciplinary team of young researchers. So we have some very inspiring photos here. And we jointly focus on the development of digital tools that support citizen participation in urban planning processes. So what we specifically do, we focus on the development of web-based dashboards that allow visualization of the data and also data analytics, but we also develop mobile-based apps while also leveraging immersive technology and numerical simulation. So we know that the citizen participation relates to active involvement of individuals and communities in decision-making processes that affect their lives. So the end result is, or what we hope to achieve by this process, is the democratic governance and the policy making and the policies that will affect the priorities, needs, and voices of these communities. So there are many ways how to do that and many forms of citizen participation, but the two that we leverage in our research group are in-person participation and online participation. So some practical examples of in-person participation that we had in our previous projects. So this is just exemplary mock-up of one EU-funded project that we had a chance to participate in, where we focus on collaborative data collection supported by the citizen participation. So we had the citizen who had to observe their living environment, collect the data, analyze this data, and better understand how they can improve and what are the challenges and issues they have to deal with in their living environment. So here we had one of such participatory process where citizens were asked to map the greening of their neighborhood and also the air quality issues. So it was a bigger setting, as we can also see here, so many participants, and but it was a very successful venue. On the other hand, we can also have a smaller scale participation. So in another project, what we were doing, we developed an augmented reality mobile-based app where citizens or individuals were supposed to collect their data or data on thermal perception, so how they feel in outdoor spaces, given the different surrounding environments. So as they move through space, they would record using our digital tools how they thermally, so what is the thermal sensation they are experiencing as they move from the green canopy to open spaces and the bodies of water. So in this case, we had one-on-one participation. So we worked with one individual at a time. So this also works quite well. But of course, successful citizen participation doesn't happen by accident. So this process requires intentional, structural, and inclusive efforts to equip individuals with needed skills, confidence, and knowledge they need for the planned activities. So either how to use the technology, how to use the scientific method, and how to basically engage meaningfully. So to make this happen, we leverage many processes, of which the critical ones are onboarding. So we provide the people with the insight on what the task behind the activity is, so how they should involve, what is the intention and what is also the benefit for them. We also have hands-on training, so where we provide the focus sessions on how to use the digital tools that we leverage in that activity. And of course, what is also important, to provide continuous support. So we cannot expect that they go through the training and they are already experts in those digital tools, so they would require continuous support throughout the process. So this is particularly important when the people and the citizens are meant to use the technology that they are not very knowledgeable about. So in this case, it's we had a training session where we developed a virtual reality prototype for our industry partners in the urban planning process. So they wanted to visualize the future design, urban designs that were intended to be built and to experience them in a human scale. So this could be done, for example, through virtual reality. But of course, they were not, they were not experienced in using this technology. So they required a lot of training on how to use the technology, how to understand, how to navigate, and how we can limit the negative sides, so like motion sickness and so on. In another example, we also had, as I said, online training sessions, because we also work with the communities which are not local, so they're not coming from Vienna or even Austria. So this was, again, within the scope of the European project. So we organized one-on-one training sessions on the digital tools. So in this case, and as I previously mentioned, the intention behind the project was that citizens collect the data from their living environment, and because it's crowdsourced data, we have a lot of questions about the data quality. So how they collect the data, whether they follow protocols. So in this case, we developed a tool, a visual analytics web-based dashboard that allowed them to instantly identify data gaps or data issues in the collected data. And of course, they had to have training. So this is also one example of such focused training session. Of course, we shouldn't be forgetting about the challenges behind the citizen participation, such as obstacles that can limit effectiveness, impact, and inclusivity of citizen participation. And some of the important aspects relate to digital divide. So whether our participants have enough digital proficiency in using the tools, or data proficiency, and then we have social exclusion, where we unintentionally may exclude different social groups like minorities, women, and so on. privacy and security issues when we might face the data breach or misuse of data, and engagement and motivation, which is also critical. So how do we sustain continuous engagement? So how do we motivate people to stay with us? Because some activities are not one-time things, but they require continuous engagement. So one of the examples, again, from the European project addresses the digital divide, where we had to work with the communities which are not very skilled in using, so they're not tech savvy, they're not skilled in using technical devices and digital tools. So we had to opt for more analog approach to data collection using analog maps that were later digitalized. So just one of the examples how this can be remedied. And with this, I would like to finish my presentation and thank you for your attention, and we can proceed with the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Milena, for this very comprehensive introduction into the topic and the first insights into your work. And I would like to welcome the other panelists. On my left hand, I have Joachim Pranzl. He's a senior expert for participation and digitalisation in Urban Innovation Vienna. So he knows a lot about the participatory processes and how they are built by the city and used by the city of Vienna. Then we have Elisabeth Interferona. She's the scientific director of the Center for Social Innovation. Well, I'm sorry. My timing. Yeah. So she's scientific director of the Center for Social Innovation in Vienna, which is an independent non-profit socio-scientific research organization here. And she is, which is addressing complex societal challenges. And she is doing research on social innovation to shape inclusive and sustainable futures. And then on the far left, we have Jan Maly, not politically, probably, but I don't know. Jan Maly is an assistant professor at Vienna University of Economics and Business, and he is working actively and doing research on tools with digital tools and AI solutions with a special focus on participatory budgeting, but also, he wants to support in general better, fairer and more representative decisions and supporting democratic processes. So, and I would like to start. So Milena gave a first insight into participatory processes in climate, to support climate action in citizens with the support of citizens. So I would like to give all of you the opportunity to give your view and your field and aspects of digital participation, because it's a very broad topic.
Should I start? Yeah,
please.
Well, thank you so much for having me. As you've mentioned, I'm part of UIV Urban Innovation Vienna. We are the climate and innovation agency of the city of Vienna. So we work very closely with the city of Vienna, but we're not part of the city of Vienna, and we might come back to that a bit later also. But as I mentioned, we work very closely, and particularly in various fields, but my expertise lies within the participation and democracy part of it. And I mentioned this because the last 2 to 3 years, we have worked together with the city of Vienna to develop its first democracy strategy, where we kind of laid out where the city of Vienna wants to head. As some of you might know, the biggest issue in Vienna is that in the meantime, more than 1/3 of its population is not allowed to vote. And this is a growing issue. And a city like Vienna needs answers to this. And some of the answers are lined out in the democracy strategy. And now, after we've worked on this also in a participatory manner, we're kind of finding new ways of are trying to finding new ways of how to engage really with all residents, and especially beyond elections, where some of them are excluded. And I mention this because in this democracy strategy, there's hardly any talk about digital tools. At the center of the democracy or the participation measures the city of Vienna has, of course, the city has a participation platform, but what they focus on in-person events. And now through the last years, really the focus also changed a bit to, inviting people or citizens or residents to rooms, to formats where we invite to a building, to a room, a certain place the city of Vienna has, to going out, to really do democratic outreach, going to parks, to public squares, to working places, to public offices, wherever people are in everyday lives. So this is really the focus. And of course, digital tools are sprinkled in wherever it's necessary. But the digital tools, they are kind of they can be one answer or one additional helpful method in the multi-method process design to really engage or reach more citizens. And just to briefly mention one project we did the last 1.5 years is, it really feels to me now we've kind of passed the times of the digital platforms, and now we're going to the AI tools when it comes to participation and democracy. And it really feels like the early days of the digital platforms again. And we, in a really small pilot project, we tested 2 AI tools for participation. One is Coplan AI, which is a visualization tool. You can imagine Nano Banana, but with a better framework and a better agent behind it. And the second was StemBrain, which is kind of a transcribing, recording, analysis, summarization tool. And we used this on a very small scale in the 4th district this year to really find out, how can AI tools really help to make participatory processes more inclusive, better quality, and more effective. Because smarter people than me, they see potential, of course, risks, and we will talk about them, I assume. But there's also a great potential in AI tools supporting citizen participation in the future.
Okay, thank you. That was, so Elisabeth.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me and to be invited to this panel. I work at the Center for Social Innovation, and if it comes to social innovation and urban digital participation, then we care most about the participation part, because we truly believe that participatory approaches are necessary to address social challenges. So it's better to work with the people concerned than for the people somewhere far away. So we truly believe, and it's not just a belief, it's what we see in our daily business, and not just in our work, but in many of others, that collaboration and participation can really work. Digital, so coming back to the term, comes second. So this resonates very much with what you said. The digital is then just a tool, the operationalization of this participation, and it's not always the tool that you want to choose. Because one of the fundamental principles of participation is that you have to understand first whom you want to involve, for what reasons, what their incentives are, what their barriers are, and then you choose the tool. So sometimes it makes sense to go fully digital, sometimes it makes sense to go fully in person, and sometimes hybrid, and sometimes you also have the external conditions with limited budget that forces you to go one way or the other. And all of the tools have advantages and disadvantages. That's often our role in the projects that we do, that we come in with our participatory knowledge and methods. In collaborative projects, we often also train our partners. Sometimes participation approaches are implemented in several cities, in several countries at the same time. And we also bring these different pilots very often together because this can be very inspiring, because some challenges are really local and some are not. So it's also great to have this platform to understand what limitations, what opportunities are taking place in other cities, other regions. Urban digital participation is the context, but we do also many projects that are not placed in a city environment. We also do many projects in rural, regional development. But we have several projects that would classify as urban digital participation projects. And I would like just to mention a few, so to give you a bit of an impression of what we do. And the degree of digitalization can vary a lot. Like, for instance, in the project Utopies, we work with digital twins and extended reality to understand in different, let's say, challenging neighborhoods, in the collaboration with urban planners and architects, to visualize an utopia. So how could an alternative scenario look like and how to make this tangible? We do also many citizen science projects, urban observatories, where with the crowd we gather data, provide evidence to also influence policy making or decision making, and this can range from measuring air quality indoor or outdoor. In Vienna, we did an indoor air quality study in schools, for instance, with the involvement of children and teachers and rectors. Last example, we work with makers a lot. So we have maker project where we use these digital fabrication tools like 3D printers and laser cutters to also prototype concrete solutions for challenges, so that that's like a hybrid format. It doesn't stay digital, but at the end you have a tangible prototype, and if it works, then it becomes a product, like edible gardens in cities with including a composting infrastructure. It's one of the examples that is a result of this project. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, and Katja already mentioned I work on developing algorithms and tools to help decision-making in digital participation. And I've worked on a lot of different types of digital participation processes, but one that's particularly dear to my heart is participatory budgeting. Maybe I can explain quickly what this is and why I think it's one of the most interesting forms of digital democratic innovation we've seen over the last 30 years. So the basic idea of participatory budgeting is that the city or a city provides some amount of budget that they specifically allocate to this process, and then citizens can propose projects or ideas for which this budget should be spent. And then in the end, these projects are put to a vote, and citizens can make the decision which of these projects actually get implemented. This idea was originally invented in Brazil in the late 80s, but now has spread around the world. It is indeed one of the most successful forms of democratic innovation we've seen, together with citizen assemblies. And it's now used in several thousand cities in the world, also all over Europe. However, in Europe, it changed dramatically from the original very analog process that we saw in Brazil, and it turned into a form of digital participation, or often hybrid participation. And I think what's interesting is that in the best versions of participatory budgeting, it is a hybrid process that combines the best of both worlds. So generally, what we see is that the collection of ideas happens online, making it very easy for everyone to just propose what they want to see in their city happening. But then these ideas need to be developed into proper projects that can actually be implemented, that have a specific budget that we can use in the decision making. And this ideally is then an analog process that happens together with the citizens in some predefined space. While then in the end, the decision making process, which I think is a key part of participatory budgeting, because where we see many participatory processes fail is that citizens don't feel that in the end they make an impact. they spend a lot of time and energy, and then like the city says, thank you, we take your information and now we do something with it. And here participatory budgeting is really different because citizens in the end make a binding decision that the city has to carry out. But the way this was made in Brazil 30 years ago was people being in a room raising their hand if they liked a project, which is a good way of making a decision, but it means that we can never take minority opinions into account. If we spend several millions of budget, as some cities do, we will fund many, many projects. And if we only always take the projects that the majority wants to see implemented, there is no room for representation, proportional fairness. And here, this is where my research comes in, and I think where we can leverage the fact that this decision-making now happens mostly online, because this allows us to use more clever decision-making algorithms that ensure that also minority opinions are represented in the final outcome. So I think this ideal path from collecting ideas online, which is very low stakes, everyone can participate, to an actual in-person deliberation to develop these ideas, and then a decision-making that is again open to everyone and allows us to use fair decision algorithms, shows kind of the ideal best way of digital hybrid participation to me. And yeah, maybe one last thing, Vienna also has 2 forms of participatory budgeting, or had it in the past, both of which are quite non-standard, and I'm happy to explain later why.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for all these wonderful insights in your different application areas or activities in respect to digital participation. So I heard from several people, several of you, that you also go for hybrid processes. Yeah. So that this is at the end like the golden or the best way, you would say. But where do you see how did digitization in these participatory processes change the way how you acquire information? Where do you see the opportunities in using these digital tools? Yeah. So where would you see, let's say, the most gain, the highest gain in using digital tools?
I mean, for me, the biggest gain we see is just lowering the threshold for participation. Because in the end, most participation processes, if you need to go to a specific place at a specific time, this is not everyone can do this. And specifically, it's very, like people who have small children, who have a lot of work, they just can't make this time usually to go to this participation. And so giving them an opportunity to participate digitally, I think is a wonderful thing. And we see this also from statistics, that we activate a completely different part of the population if we add a digital component to our participation processes.
May I ask how you reach the people? How do you approach? How do you find your cohort of people?
In participatory budgeting, this is certainly the hardest question. A lot of participatory budgeting processes fail because they're not advertised accordingly. One of my PhD students, her brother is living in Munich, and he only found out that they have a quite big participatory budgeting process because he follows the mayor on Instagram. And this was the only channel this was properly advertised. So it's up to the organization that organizes participatory budgeting to advertise this, to send letters to the citizens. You see, I lived in Amsterdam for a few years, and they would also go out on the street and give them a tablet in their hand and say, now you can vote. I think the advertising part, again, has to be very analog.
I think so. Someone else?
Yeah, but just to add to what Jan mentioned, to lower the threshold, we also, in this pilot project with the AI tools, we really saw the potential for a more inclusive approach to participation. One example, we did a street event in the 4th district, and we invited, residents, neighbors, stakeholders, school kids, etc. to this event. And what we had there, one kind of station was just a microphone, a microphone where people could talk into. And it already lowers the barrier of, instead of writing or other means of gathering data or information, we just put a microphone there with one main question, what is your ideas or what is your needs about the redesign of this street. And AI really helps us in doing this because it automatically records and transcripts it, but also, it doesn't matter which language you speak. You can speak in Turkish, in English, in French, it doesn't matter, or it almost doesn't matter which language you speak into this microphone. So it really lowers the dimension threshold for participation. Yeah.
May I add, in terms of advantages of digital tools, I mean, it's also a big opportunity to invite many people. So in-person meetings are, of course, limited because, literally you can involve thousands of people in digital participatory formats, which will hardly be possible in in-person formats. It's in terms of time management, it's also great that you can participate asynchronously. So as you said, you don't have to go to a place, but you can also decide when you have time to dedicate while waiting on the bus or while taking the elevator. I don't know, depending on how much time the participation requires, but that's your choice. So you don't have to be committed for a certain time and a certain date. And also in terms of language proficiency. So you will hardly ever have, it's not the standard that you have translation available in in-person meetings, and in online settings you can easily, with the help of AI or other digital tools, have the content translated for you to participate. So whatever language you speak, it will become easier.
And I can add one more aspect to that, because what the digital tools may unlock is encouraging participation for those who might be a little bit introverted or not that readily speaking in the public settings, so they might be hesitant to engage. And through digital means, they can just be in the comfort of their spaces or even of their homes and then still be a part of a process. So this is also a nice avenue for allowing everyone and making the whole process inclusive, because we then don't exclude anyone. But what I can also add to that is something that Elizabeth mentioned at the beginning, is understanding the people. So for whom we are planning the activities, who is our target audience, because on that premise, the whole development of the digital technology is based on. So whether we're going to fail or succeed, and I can, because we are meant to always share success stories, I can also share a failure on in this European project where we really focus on a top-down decision-making process. So we, as a researcher, as a lead of the project, we decided how we're gonna implement things, and that failed really badly, because we didn't talk to the communities, we didn't listen to them, we didn't consider what they're capable of and what they're, hesitant or not hesitant to use. And once we just changed the strategy and went to the grassroots perspectives and talking to the people, we unlocked so much potential. And also something that Joachim mentioned about recording voices, because we always leverage our digital apps, mobile-based things. But this also didn't work in one of our case studies that was in Bristol, because we were dealing with minorities, also language barrier. But what we developed was a conversation station. This is how we coined the term. It's a little portable, like a station on a bike with many microphones where people can just come without pressure and record their views and perspectives on topics. And this was really non-forced and very comfortable setting for everyone to speak their minds. So yeah, coming back to the importance of considering for whom we are building the tools and who is our target audience and how we talk to them. Thank you.
Yeah, I would maybe add one more example because you mentioned, large scale decision making. I think, and this is not something we work on, but it's always worth looking at when it comes to digital democracy at what Taiwan is doing, and what they're doing is large scale consensus building. Yeah, they developed their own platform based on a US-based, coming from a US company. Where the idea is to have kind of a social network similar to social media, but then again a bit different. And the idea is that you do not have a reply function because replying leads to more polarization. This is the argument. And instead they have kind of upvote, downvote, and pass. So they really try to look for good arguments depending on the question on the topic, and then look at those which are kind of building bridges between different strings of arguments. And through this upvoting and downvoting, they can see, this Taiwan, different country, different context, different culture, obviously. But they kind of see, which arguments are in favor of many. Yeah, and they call this large-scale consensus making. And they practice this from my outside view. Maybe you also know more about this quite successfully. And it's quite interesting to also look at what they're doing.
Sounds really interesting. So I think, working with the arguments, looking which arguments find most agreeers or disagreement. That's something which then I think also will help the decision makers at the end really to find good decisions, which is bringing to my next questions. Yeah. So how do these tools also support then? I mean, you are acquiring with these tools the citizen wishes, ideas, arguments, and so on, but how can these tools then, are these tools used to come to a final decision making? I heard there sometimes the decision making is really done by the people. Sometimes, but very often I think it's just to collect information and directions, and then do you have any experience how that then fuels into political decision making at the end, and how is that how digital tools can help here and are used to achieve that?
Maybe I can start by giving a negative example and some scientific evidence why this is really bad. So Alain Londemore, a professor from Yale, very closely followed big citizen assemblies that Macron started in France. And she showed that during these assemblies, people's trust in democracy in the government really increased. But then afterwards, they made concrete suggestions, and these were basically ignored by the government. And then their trust in government went way below where it started. So I think in reality, for a lot of participatory processes, the idea is, even if the ideas are used later on, there is no transparent way. And I think we know from scientific research, this is very dangerous. If people don't see a clear path how these ideas are implemented, then they might even be less happy with the government than before they started the participatory process. So from this side, I think it's not always clear how it's done, but I think it should be clear. And in particular, it should be clear from the outside. Because there are also cases where the politicians would say, but we took this into account into our inter-party deliberation, and then it influenced this, but this is not transparent for the citizens, and then it's not helpful for building trust.
I would like to add that that in practice, what you often see, sometimes participation is just an alibi action because it's the good thing to do, and you show that you are doing these things, and it's not a real commitment of the decision makers to take these participatory results into account. But there are also other occasions where it doesn't work, although the administration or the decision makers are highly committed, and it's just because there is a time gap between the consultation or participation process and the actual implementation. And when you invite people, that's part of the expectation management that has to be really well done, because maybe it will take... So you should be very clear on what happens with the results, when the results will be taken into account, what's the probability of the likeliness of being implemented, in order not to frustrate people and in order for people to really want to participate and to dedicate their free time. So because, of course, they also want to see outcomes. I can also say that it's important to work with the local representatives, such as municipalities, because they should act as the voices to the decision makers. So whatever people are coming with, the suggestions or the data they collect from the environment, like in the European project we had, that were supposed to identify the gaps or the challenges, existing challenges that should be addressed. We also had in a consortium the representatives of the municipality who were supposed to take that knowledge and insight generated by the people and use that as a message to the decision makers. But however, it's also something that we identify or came into contact with, is that if our plans for the improvement of the urban environment is not aligned with the plans that the municipalities already have or the government already have, we will reach the reluctance of having anything implemented in real life and in real context. So what we also did is that essentially we were forced to form our participatory activities within the scope of the ongoing processes that were already ongoing in the city and align that with the directions that were already there. So yeah, as I said, it was very reluctant to just go and hear the people and just take that and implement that in a urban planning or in any other context, because yeah, it's reluctance, priorities may be somewhere else, and there might be no budget to support what we wish. So there is still this gap of how to translate effectively the voices of people into the decision making.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a bit surprised, because I expected that the use of digital tools would accelerate decision-making processes also on the politics, on the political side, on the government side, or governance side. So that's a very interesting insight, I think. And what do you think would be needed? I mean, we have also AI-based tools were mentioned, but they were mainly mentioned as a mean to ease the data acquisition, or the communication. We said, okay, on one hand, I think we can use AI to be really interactive, to have complex visualizations, allowing real-time planning of complex urban situations. We heard AI tools can be used to translate, to communicate with a broader amount of people with different cultural backgrounds. But I would have expected then also, like in the back end of the whole process, let's say, what is coming after, that we have tools which really allow us to faster aggregate results, to make them, let's say, to actionable results, Do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words on the Polis platform used in Taiwan, and why it's a good example of something that's often done very badly. So I think we wanted to also talk about the limitations of digital tools, and I think what we often see, and I've seen this talking to practitioners from municipalities a lot, is indeed after such a participation process, there is so much input that it becomes extremely tedious to read all of this. And so they're very happy to outsource this to AI. But I think if you just do this in a very naive way and you say, oh, I mean, the worst offender, I think, has been in the UK. There was a big debate on the future of the NHS where they got 11 million comments and they didn't know what to do. No one wanted to read 11 million comments. So they just threw it into ChatGPT. And I think this completely misses the point. Of course, it gives you a summary in the end, but the point is not just the summary of opinions, but it's seeing the whole spectrum of opinions. And here, this Polis platform, I think, is actually one of the best examples of how to do this. They work together with Google DeepMind on understanding this. And they use LLMs only in the very end. They use these voting procedures and other algorithms, not the ones I would use, but that's more small technical details where I disagree. Generally, I really like their idea of trying to understand the whole spectrum of ideas and then only in the very end use LLMs to summarize maybe 20, 30, 40 comments that have already been recognized as belonging to the same group of opinions. So I think there is definitely space for this, and I think as we see this overwhelmment of politicians in the face of this many comments, it's also necessary. But how to do it good and in a principled way that really helps is, I would say, more of an open research question than something that's solved.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add quickly also from our experience, very often when we use digital tools, we don't use them for the decision-making part. We use them for the participation part. And so we don't really have too many examples. Taiwan is probably one of the few where, really digital tools are involved in decision-making. But we use digital tools in not only gathering data, but also analyzing it, clustering it. AI now adds to this, and we are far from, as Jan mentioned, having good algorithms or, having open, transparent, democratically built AI infrastructure where we can really have full trust in what they're doing and the results they produce. And just to quickly share, we use this AI tool, Brain. We gathered all this information, the data with the microphone station, but we also had a QR code, so you could do this from home, and it gathers all the ideas, how you want to have the street redesigned here. And what was quite interesting, then it was the first time we also did it, and the Austrian Institute for Technology also did the evaluation of this project, and there will be a research report also coming in autumn, hopefully. And what was quite interesting is that it captured the broader arguments, those in favor, those against, this and that. But it really also captured very small, if you asked explicitly, smaller ideas. Somebody mentioned they want to have like a small stage where local musicians can play on this kind of square at which the street ends in. And we also saw this in the results. So from our experience and also the colleagues from AIT, they agreed with this. This was quite impressive in terms of the results AI produced. But of course, this was a pilot project, a research project. We went back to the data, to all the recordings. We double-checked everything. So at the moment, the time-saving aspect is not really there at the moment, because we are far from, trusting the tools to really give a good result.
Okay.
So from my end, my experience is also on data analytics side and how we use the AI in that context. So when we have huge amounts of data, how we process that and how we basically come up with some insights which might be beneficial. So for example, because as I said, digital tools may be used in different settings for data collection, but also the comments, the feelings from the people. So we use the sentiment analysis to see what are the preferences. So what are the common issues within the whole scope of the data collected. So concerns, priorities, wishes by the people, and then we generated, for example, a word cloud, and then the priorities really pop up. However, this may be biased because it's also driven by who provided the inputs to this procedure. So if we just work with the minorities, we're just going to capture their voices. So yeah, we also had that in the European project because we just worked with the very specific communities, and we got something out of it. There was a knowledge on our end, but then also the question of the bias in that knowledge. And we also used the image classification algorithms, for example. So we wanted to capture the quality of the road infrastructure. So what the citizens were supposed to do, they had the dash cams mounted in their cars, and they were just recording, and then we had to process the recordings and get something out of that. So there was an image classification algorithm behind that, and that also worked well, but it's also not very subjective, so it's an objective information that we get. But as I said, so from my experience, it's only AI used on the data analytics side and not how we actually support the participation.
But at the end, the data analytics. Yeah, and I think this is also
exactly so insight generation,
yeah. Which I think is an important point. But I mean, we heard already about the we want to switch a bit more into the limitations and potential threats. And I had a look. Also, there is a document from the United Nations, actually, from last year. It's a draft in international guidelines on people-centered smart cities, which is quite interesting to read. And there, if we are leaving our European Viennese bubble where everybody has smartphones and so on, so it becomes quite clear as they write 39% of the people in cities do not have access to internet. Yeah, so I mean, this is probably, it was quite extreme to me, but it's an example for how to include marginalized people and groups into these processes. And honestly, in Vienna, I know there is some participation, and I'm among those which are not allowed to vote here because I'm German. You too. So 3 people here. 4 people out of 5 here. You are allowed to vote or not?
I'm part of the present.
Okay. Yeah. So we 4 or 5 people sitting here are living in Vienna but not allowed to vote. So it would also something to address us, but actually, I do not have so much access to it. And I think also if we are talking about more, I think in Vienna, probably almost everybody has access to internet somehow. But how can we, or what are good ways? I mean, you mentioned already, we talked about advertisement. What are the threats? I mean, if we are missing out people also living on the street, for instance, they are a vulnerable group of people which probably would be also interested to participate and to improve their own situation. How are digital tools marginalizing them even more? Is what are ways in addressing this? Or what are your views with the change? Or what are measures to change that? Or do we have a even larger digital divide in the future? Those which have access to digital tools and smartphones, and those which don't have, which have access to them. Yeah, I mean, this goes a bit back to the initial intro that you have to know whom to involve and how. So if we are talking about marginalized people, it's not that they all do not have access to mobile phones and are not digital native. So you have to do a bit of research and to find the specific needs. But it's true, yeah, you have to have a device, you have to have internet, and you have to have certain digital skills to participate in this digital participation formats. But it's also other things that are difficult in digital with digital tools, like longer-term commitments are far more difficult to establish in digital environments than in person environments, and also highly conflictual issues are better to be addressed and resolved in in-person meetings, because it really requires a professional moderation, facilitation. And what we also know from the digital worlds is that the level of trust is below compared to an in-person setting, and also empathy is less. So you have more of this polarization that you mentioned earlier, and also this can be cared about in an in-person situation better. If we are talking about trust, if I might just take this, yeah, so we are in the moment we are talking about digital tools. We are running into the problem that they can be hacked. I just want to cite Bruce Schneider, who said everything that is put into the system can be attacked, everything that is output can be weaponized. How do you react to this statement in the context of digital participation, use of digital tools in urban participation? Whoever.
Because we had relatable experience on that side. Definitely the output may be harmful, especially if the citizens are not trained well or informed well on how to use the digital technology. So in our context, we had the data, so air quality data collection campaign, and citizens were supposed to use and to carry a little device, like a monitoring, a sensor device with them to map the quality of air in their neighborhood. But what they didn't pay attention to is to turn off the device when they are at home. So we had all the data about their daily movement, about where they live, how they behave throughout the day, and it's very harmful. If that data falls into other hands, I mean, it can be really weaponized or used in a very harmful way. So we had to do a lot of post-processing of the data that we collected. Otherwise, we would just have to throw away the data, because we were also supposed to make this data publicly available. So that would not be possible in this example, because we had so much privacy breach just with that one campaign. Because, yeah, as I said, it's maybe a breach on our end, or that they were not informed well, or we just didn't quiz them even on how to use the sensors. We just took it that they understood how to properly use the devices.
First, let me address the security question by saying I do not believe that in digital participation, the approach to security is unique to digital participation. I think we have to apply the same principles as everywhere, understanding the risk and the benefit and weighing this. And I, for example, would never advocate for electronic voting in national elections. But I think there are cases where, like, you have to put in the correct amount of security and evaluate whether the risk you're taking is appropriate for the benefit you get. I just very shortly wanted to cite one of my favorite studies in response to the question before about marginalization. So one of the benefits of digital participation is that it can be much more expressive than, say, a traditional which party do you vote for participation. And we, including me, are generally perceive this as a big advantage. You can express your preferences much more fine-tuned. They've recently read an extremely nice study where they studied the shift from single first past the post voting to proportional representation in Italy in the 60s. And they could show that for well-educated, politically active citizens, this indeed led to a much better representation of their preferences. But for less educated, less politically involved citizens, they often misused or didn't fully grasp how to use this expression of preferences in the way that most benefited their interests. So I think complexity and more fine-grained ways of expressing preferences is a great thing, and we all strive for this, but you should always be aware that this does not affect everyone equally.
Good. I think we are at the point where I would like to ask you just to give a last statement, and then we switch over to the audience and into a more open discussion. So I don't know who wants to start. Just a last sentence, or should we skip that? But yeah.
I mean, I'm very selfishly using this last sentence to advertise 2 events. If you want to learn more about digital participation, in 2 weeks there will be the Digital Humanism Summer School on the topic of AI and democracy. And then in September we will organize the Digital Democracy Conference here in Vienna. If you want to know more, just ask me.
I will use my last statement to advocate for professional handling of participatory approaches. I think it's a tricky thing where you have to have experience, where you have to have really professional facilitators, moderators, because you deal with people and you deal with group dynamics, irrespective if it's a digital environment or a face-to-face environment. And you have to deal with different personalities, and that's affecting also already like the invitation process. In psychology, there is this theory of locus of control. So if you don't think that you can influence anything because it's just decided for you, then we'll probably not participate. So already how you conceptualize the invitations can speak to people, make them want to participate or not. So professional handling, I would advocate for.
I would quickly come back to the term urban digital participation, and I can imagine a world in a couple of years or further down the road where participation really happens hybrid, and wherever we are with the phone or with any digital device that we have in the pocket or on the wrist or wherever, because the technology nowadays makes it so easy that you can, instead of going to a digital participation platform, which is quite a barrier and it's complicated, you need a good interface, you need this and that. Nowadays you can do voice messages, you can run it through communication apps, you can do through WhatsApp, through Signal, you name them, you can do it through email, you can gather this information. So it really, there's an opportunity through AI and digitalization to really scale the listening part of governments to its citizens, to the ideas, to the needs of its citizens. So there's really, and obviously there's downsides, there's risks to this. But before we're getting there, and I think there's these 2 main challenges, is first we need to kind of democratically own the build technical infrastructure to make this happen and to make it trustworthy. And we need a political leadership to make this democratic infrastructure happen, but also to really build a democratic design where we can, move from one-off participation formats, one-off citizen assemblies, one-off participatory budgets, and you name them, and to really a new democratic design where it's really, part of our everyday lives to really participate and be engaged in decision-making processes in cities and beyond.
Yeah. And my closing statement would be on some thoughts behind maximizing the effectiveness and the impact behind the participatory processes is that even if we are very deep into a digital age and we just take it for granted that everyone can handle digital tools, we still have to think about the alternatives. So to not exclude anyone and to be fully exclusive, also to consider accessibility of any methods we use, because people do not engage in the same way, they don't process information the same way, they don't react the same way, so accessibility and alternatives would be important, and also training and continuous support.
Okay, thank you for these statements, and we are open for questions from the audience. Yeah, I don't know, over there.
Okay, how to start? Humanism, the concept of humanism and universal human rights is at this moment in time not only something that can bring us to a utopian future, but we are at the point where it's, in my opinion, the only concept that can save us from the worst outcome of the developments that we experience. I want to thank you for your honesty, because what I experience in my personal life is this, what you also mentioned, where the limits are of what is possible in Vienna. Vienna presents itself as a shining light of humanistic values, of respecting human rights, but this is not the reality for all people living here. Lots of people aren't able to vote. That's a big problem. And also experience people make with the government are very different. And there was also a study from the AK about participation, democratic participation, and the longer people who come to Vienna, to Austria, live here, the lower the trust, because reality does not meet the promises. And what I would like to know, how would you einschätzen, estimate how you the data you are able to collect represents the factual distribution of the participants in the social economic status they live in. How is the participation by the different groups? How is it?
Yeah, do you like to answer? Yeah.
I can try to, and you're certainly right. There's a lot of limitations, and there's kind of the Vienna's democracy strategy was kind of an answer or a first step towards actually creating this collective understanding of the real problems at the moment. And you mentioned them. And it's certainly a challenge to really reach certain groups. It's about socioeconomic aspects, it's about language barriers, it's about physical barriers, all different barriers. Maybe just to mention one positive example in Vienna, which is the Vienna Climate Team. It's one participatory budget project. And I mention it because it does many things right, but at the same time, the budget it has to carry this out is really high. So, you know, in terms of doing participation right, we need a lot of resources already to getting to a really good process where you can be most inclusive, most accessible, and so forth. And so the process in the Vienna climate team is you have different phases, and in the first ideation phase, there's different settings and formats, and it's about in one district of the city of Vienna, you can give ideas on how to tackle climate change, or how the district should adapt to the climate on the public area. And so it's about the ideation phase. And what they do is really, most of it happens online, because this is about scalability, and then you can generate many ideas. But what they also do is really try to be in as many parts of the district in person. They have different workshops. They work with multipliers. They work with social networks within the districts. So they really have a long phase before the project actually starts to build up these networks, to really try to reach as many as possible. And it's still quite complicated and a hard task. And then more towards the end, I mean, in between there's a co-creation phase and another phase. But in the end, the decision-making happens with a kind of a small citizen jury, which is similar on a smaller scale to a citizen assembly, but it's a citizen jury. And citizens of the district are selected by lot and based on representation data of the district. And from the data I know, I'm not involved in the project, but from what I know, what they manage there, you know, it's not many people. It's around 20, 25, 30 people, depending on the size of the district, is that they're quite successful in really having a representative sample of the people living in the district. But I mentioned this just to make, or to highlight how complicated and how much resources you need to really make a good and functioning participatory process with high impact. And the challenges you named, they will continue to, we all together, we have to work on answers to this, and digital tools can be one answer, but it's certainly not the answer.
Yeah. Can I maybe give a very short follow-up, because it's very short. So indeed, we know from PB that often only people from specific socioeconomic backgrounds are voting, and you see this in the distribution of projects that are funded. And we studied this also for the climate teams because we're very interested. It's the only PB process using a citizen assembly, as far as I know. And we indeed didn't see the same biases. So there was no correlation between the projects where they are placed and the socioeconomic status of the neighborhood. So in this sense, this is also, I think, why citizen assemblies are the other most successful form of democratic innovation, because they really seem to avoid these pitfalls of uneven participation. And we can show this, at least for the climate teams, to be working.
There was a question there, and then I saw one here, and then I saw one here. So that's...
So basically, I'm already glad that I heard already the last statement before the question round about accessibility. And that's also the topic of my question, because I would like to know how you want to make sure that basically everyone can use the digital tools for participation. Because, for example, there are often devices or applications where screen readers simply don't work, or the thing with the microphones might not work for people who cannot hear. So what's your plan in that regard? Offering several possibilities, or do you have the idea for one possibility that works for everyone, young and old, with and without disabilities?
Yeah, maybe I can comment on that, because we are technology providers. So what we do, we develop the digital tools for participation, and accessibility is definitely a critical aspect of the effectiveness of these tools. So what we leverage in our approach is the iterative prototyping. So we come up with the first version of the tool, but then we work with the people, see how that tool performs in a real environment through the test case or a smaller application case with the people in situ. and then they tell us, yes, we need this more information from the tool, or the tool is not comprehensive enough, or is just complex, or it does not cater to my needs. So we really leverage this collaboration between us as a technology provider and the user, and this would be our approach. So yes, thank you.
I think the question was also how people with disabilities can access the tools. Yeah? So I think you are blind, is that right? Or you have visually impaired? Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This was also what the question was about, whether there are also people with visual or also other impairments in your test group. Because if those people are missing in the test group, then, yeah, it might be difficult if they then suddenly pop up in the huge environment.
I can maybe provide an example of a citizen science project where we intentionally we wanted to be accessible for people also with visual impairments. And in this particular citizen science project, it was about astrophysics, a very specific topic, I have to say. And citizens were invited to classify data on the Universe platform. And in order to be accessible, the data was sonified. We had a blind astrophysicist in our team, and this worked really, really well. And it worked well not only for people with visual impairments, but also for other people, elderly, and also for people without visual impairments, because they would have two modes of getting the data, not only visual, but also in the form of sound. So that was a beautiful example.
Just very quickly, as Milena mentioned, I think it's all about participatory design of the tools we use, and then about evaluation, what works, what doesn't work, and then we iterate from there. And everyone who does participation, very often it's the participation part, is just the very tedious and inspiring part, but our work very often doesn't stop there. We then go back, we look what has worked, what hasn't worked, and we try to make it better the next time. And again, limited resources are always a challenge there. But I think what really helps is having high quality standards for participation processes. And then it doesn't matter if they're digital or in person. We just need high quality standards to make sure, people with all kinds of barriers can participate in various different ways. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is particular around online participation and the increasing blurring between kind of human agency and machine agency. It's not just in terms of, many of these things are easy to script and then to overrepresent people who know how to do that. But also, so we want to avoid that, but also that perhaps, there's increasing legitimate machine interaction. If I have, an agent doing something in my, that I want it to do, so it's not just malicious hacking, but it seems to be something that's increasingly difficult to differentiate. And how do you, deal with that?
I mean, what I can say, I think the like generally hacking the voting part and so on, this obviously has been possible for a long time. And generally, I think we figured out security solutions that are good enough for most cases that at least, if you want to hack it, you have to really know what you're doing. But on the LLM part, I think this is really a new challenge that we have, at least as far as I can tell, not figured out how to do this at all. So essentially all language input participation methods so far have been thought of as this is pretty safe from bot attacks, and it's clearly not anymore. And this is, I don't know, I don't think there is any good answer to this right now.
Thank you. Well, you talked a lot about, or gave us a lot of material about how to include a wider population into your studies. And what intrigued me in the beginning was your mention of decision-making algorithms that also make sure minority proposals make it into the selection. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Of course, nothing I like more. So the idea here is, say we in a participatory budgeting, Paris spends roughly 80 million per year through participatory budgeting, and they used to use a method where just the most popular projects get funded, and say 40% of your population are cyclists and 60% are car drivers, then all the most popular projects would be streets, and the cycling population would get nothing. And so researchers, me and others over the last 10 years, developed methods that kind of generalize the proportional representation methods we know from parliamentary elections. So if you vote for the Austrian parliament, you certainly wouldn't expect that the largest party gets all the seats in the parliament, but you expect that seats are allocated proportionally. And we can generalize this idea also to participatory budgeting and other participation processes to ensure that smaller parts of the population, if they propose projects that are also cheap enough in comparison to how many people want it, these projects nevertheless can be funded. And these methods are actually now used in some cities with big success. So it's an interesting technical challenge, and then it becomes an interesting challenge of explaining this to policymakers and citizens why this is necessary. But this is the general idea of how this is done. And if you want to talk about the mathematical details afterwards, I'm more than happy.
The demographic practice that they used to say it.
So this is important. So this is also where I would think strongly disagree with how Polis does it. So for us, it's important not to use any outside group definitions. So the groups are formed naturally from observing the expressed preferences. So we see interest groups emerging in the vote data from their common approvals. So this also Polis does, and I think what's very important, what we do is we do not try to cluster people. You can be part of several interest groups based on how you vote. So this is not possible in Polis. In Polis, you're part of one group, and I think that's not realistic. And in something like participatory budgeting, you're maybe a cyclist, but you also have small children, so you want playgrounds. And with the methods we propose, which are basically game theory-based simulations, we just see from your expressed preferences which groups you want to be part of, and then we allocate the budget accordingly.
I really love the panel, and thank you, Jan, for talking about the challenges of the algorithmic dimension of this. And as a computer scientist who works on a lot of participation projects, I also am torn about the role of algorithms versus the role of participatory mechanisms that are social practices. But participation is deeply political. It's a political act to participate. It's a political act to instigate participation. And often the deliberation is really crucial. Even if the decision doesn't end up being what I wanted, the deliberation process might convince me that it was the right thing. So how do we ensure that we create mechanisms of deliberation? And what Chantal Mouffe proposes in her theory of agonism is so healthy in democracy. We need to find mechanisms to not just build consensus, but to ensure dissensus, ensure agonism, so that we recognize that there are different belief systems, different people's preferences, different biases and discriminations they're experiencing, but it might shift my own attitudes in the process of deliberation. So I wonder what tools, both social practices and algorithmic tools, could support that process.
I'm happy to give a first answer here. So I think these same ideas of representation also apply to deliberation support. So the big problem that we see all over the internet is once the online discussion becomes too large, no one can follow all the content anymore. And so what we're used to is seeing either the newest comments or the most popular comments. and neither are particularly conducive to the type of deliberation where I see other opinions. Okay, and then of course there's also the social media engagement-based way of displaying comments, which I think is equally dangerous. And I think here also, so this is a hard problem both conceptually and algorithmically, how to understand which comments to show. But I think this is something that I'm doing research on, other people are doing research on, and in particular something that we should not leave to the social media platforms to kind of give the way of this is how such a discussion should be displayed, but instead leverage research we have here in Europe. This is one area where Europe is really, really good to develop new ways to support deliberation, both in like formal deliberation processes, but also in more informal spaces. So maybe the federated social media is a chance to get more of these deliberation support methods of displaying comments into use instead of the engagement-based or popularity-based methods. And then I think for social practices, other people can give more concrete answers. Just to add, I think I already mentioned it. I think we need political leadership to make it happen. And we have ideas. We have citizen assemblies, we have deliberative juries, we have deliberative polls. So we have existing methods, and I'm pretty sure we will develop new methods to make this happen. We just need a different approach of how we design our democratic system and how we really try to listen and engage the citizens in today's world instead of, still focusing on election-based democracy, which we used to have or we're still having. So I think there are methods out there. We need to practice them. We need to institutionalize them, go from one-off examples to really having them embedded in the institutional design of our democratic system, and then build from there. But this is, there's some steps to go along the way.
Okay, yeah, I think we move the rest of the discussion to the lunch break. I think they will all be still here. I would like to thank you all for coming. I would like to thank the wonderful panel. I learned a lot, although we had a lot of discussions already before the panel. And I hope you also enjoyed, and thanks for your questions. So I guess, we will all be around. You can come and ask and discuss with us further. Thanks you.